The median rent on a two-bedroom apartment in Cambridge, Massachusetts today is $3,200. I'm Chris Schmidt, and this is Renters Matter. Tonight we're going to talk about two different things. The first thing we're going to do is give you an update on a conversation we had a couple weeks ago about the Cambridgeside Galleria. The second thing we're going to do is talk a little bit about what job security looks like for renters and why it matters so much. So, a couple weeks ago we talked about the Cambridgeside Galleria. The Cambridgeside Galleria, of course, Cambridge's big mall, built in the 1980s, the developers or owners of the parcel or whatever, I don't know, developers of the mall, basically had come to the city and said, like, look, retail is dying, we need to build more here or we can't keep the mall open. Like, that there's just not the money anymore. The mall, the Cambridgeside Galleria, has already, like, closed all the stores on the third level and converted them to offices, but they're basically saying, like, that's just not enough. It's a giant building. We really want to do something with it. We want to make it better. We want to make it more responsive to the needs of modern people, but we need to have the ability to build a bigger building to do that. So one of the biggest problems with the mall, as far as it goes for, as it is that one of the big frontages on it is on First Street in Cambridge, and is basically a big brick wall. It's the side of the parking garage or the side of the mall, but it's this, like, big, long, block-long space that is just like a loading dock and a brick wall. And it's like, it's terrible. Like, you don't want big brick walls in your commercial or residential districts because it causes big brick walls, like, are bad for street activation, right? Like, if you're across the street from a big brick wall, your businesses, they're not, you don't have lively street people walking down the streets, you don't have restaurants, you don't have all these things for people to get into. So one of the things that the mall developers want to do is actually take a lot of that space along First Street where people walk today, because you're right next to a residential area. You're going to be between Kendall Square and the new Lechmere station when that's finished, where people walk all the time, and they want to redevelop that into a commercial, like, retail frontage space with restaurants and cafe seating and other things like that, which currently they don't have, right? It's an indoor mall, and you can enter, like, on the south end or the north end, but there's nothing you can really do on that west side, like, building. So they really want to fix that. But that's going to be a big redevelopment. Like, it's really refactoring the whole size, style of the building, etc. And so they basically said, like, we want to fix this. We want to have these better street-level retail spaces that are better for the street and better for the mall, but we can't do that if we don't have the ability to redevelop part of the mall. And so they came and they said, okay, here's our plan. We're gonna ask for more space, right? We own we own a big chunk of this property. It's a couple different, lots or whatever, but we own a big chunk of this property. We want to have the ability to build more space. We're going to build a tower that has some office, or we're going to build a taller building that has some offices. We're going to build a tower that has some housing, and then we're going to reconfigure this whole First Street retail corridor, and we're going to improve the canal, like the park area, to the north side of the mall. Like, that's the goal. And so there's a big conversation, and they basically said, we need this to save the mall. Like, this is what we need this to save the mall. And because they said we need this to save the mall, that it became this thing about, like, how much money are we going to make, how much money are we going to be able to sell things for, everything else like that is something that, a lot of people are like, well, you say you need it to be this big to save the mall, but do you really need it to be this big, right? Like, because if you build a lot of commercial office spaces, right, like, you're going to have more people driving in, you're going to have more people coming in and commuting there. There's more, traffic, which is, of course, one of these buzzwords that makes people upset. Understandably, like, I'm not saying the traffic in Cambridge isn't bad, but whatever. And so there was this, well, do you really need this much space? Now, for me, I'm like, don't give them that much space. Give them 3 times that much space, right? Like, if you gave them more space, they would be able to build more housing. And so this is something that I really feel strongly about, is, like, I don't care about tall buildings. I care about more homes. Like, to me, it matters less that I give somebody, people build, like, a 20-story tall building, like I see right across the street from the CCTV studio here at Mass and Main, and more of, what is the split between housing and office. And I don't really love that this is a 70-30 housing office, development. And I thought that was a little bit concerning. but that was something that they were proposing. So because they said we need the money to make this happen, we need this much height to make this happen, the city actually hired an architect, not an architect, but someone who is experienced in urban planning, building design, whatever, to review the financial documents that the developer put together and say, well, are they getting rich off of this? Like, what is this actually going to do? And so they had passed the documents along in a way that wasn't public, and they came back and they said, like, look, based on what the developer is saying, we believe that this developer is going to spend 88% of their construction costs, 88% of their end value cost is going to be spent on construction costs. So this is another way of saying that, like, at the end of the day, the building is going to be worth, say, $100 million more, and they're going to spend $88 million more to get there. So they're only going to have $12 million in their pocket, which is, for a development company, is actually, I think, on the small end of things. And in particular, it's difficult because they want to keep the mall open. They want to redevelop this whole space, and so they're going to do that. Now, because they were able to review these financials, they were able to come back to the city council, and the city council said, well, how do we get more housing, or let's keep the same amount of housing, but let's get more affordable housing. So affordable housing has to be subsidized by the developer because they're basically not getting as much rent. The property is not going to be worth as much to them, and so they have to get money in some other way. So one of the things that had previously been talked about was, like, we're going to spend $25 million fixing this boathouse. And I think I had mentioned this in the last time. I was like, I don't want $25 million for a boathouse. I want more housing. And so this is actually one of the things that changed about the project, is that that $25 million to the boathouse, I think, is gone or significantly reduced. And instead what they're doing is giving a $10 million contribution to East End House, which is a nonprofit in the East Cambridge neighborhood, as well as what they ended up doing was making a commitment to have more affordable housing within their package, their deal, right? So it's the same amount of housing, so it'll still be 180,000 square feet, or 172,000 square feet of housing, but the affordable housing, instead of being 50%, or there's half and half between low income and medium and moderate income units, will now be 65%, where it will be 30 and 35. So this is actually an interesting example, because this is actually the split that had been proposed by the Cambridge Residents Alliance, who said that they would support 30-30-30 split of housing, of low income, moderate income, and market rate housing, which is basically what we're getting here. Now, if it were me, I would have said, like, I don't care so much about the affordable housing component of that. I would like there to just be more housing. That I would have really personally rathered that they did a 40-60 split on housing, and lowered the affordability component, especially because a lot of those moderate income units are really basically just going to be market rate units anyway. So I think the city is getting a little bit less than it's bargaining for in that deal. But in any case, now I've spent 8 minutes talking about it, which is about 1 minute for every hour that the council spent on this just yesterday. Not including any other meetings, not including any other documentation review or anything else like that. These councilors sat in session for 8 hours yesterday talking about what is one property, one developer, 180 units of housing. In a city with 50,000 units of housing, 50,000 homes, we were arguing about increasing that total number by 0.02% for 8 hours. 8 hours, which, by the way, is pretty much the most, like, other than the affordable housing overlay, is the most that the council has talked about any given housing project at all, like, almost all term. I'm probably exaggerating slightly because I haven't, paid attention to every single fight. I guess the courthouse was more, but wasn't really a housing project. But regardless, like, so much time and energy spent on this one small development that will make a difference, no doubt. Like 180 homes for people, especially like 80 of them being, 3-bedroom, low-income units is great. Don't get me wrong. Like, I want more housing all over the place. I want this type of development, though, to not require 8 hours of time and 6 months of permission getting, that this whole process has not just been the 8 hours now, but instead has been the 8 hours today, as well as another 25 hours over the past 6 months. And part of the reason that they had it in a special meeting yesterday is because their deadline on 6 months expires, because they filed this, earlier this year, and it's a refiling of an earlier petition they filed at the beginning of 2018. That means that we have spent, or 2019, that means that we have spent the entire year arguing about something that is literally going to add less than 0.2% of new homes to Cambridge, when we have a waiting list of 5,000 people who need just access to low-income homes, right? So, okay, great. This is going to create, 80 units for that waiting list of 5,000. By the time the meeting was over, we probably had another 80 people on that list. The idea that we should have these massive arguments where someone tries to nitpick the details of a developer's plan constantly in order to push it for slightly more housing is ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. What we should be doing is setting a standard for what we think should happen. That for every 100,000 square feet of office space that you get permitted, you're going to have to put in 150,000 square feet of housing, and if you do that, you can build up to 200 feet tall, or whatever. That's the type of thing we should be doing, setting the rules so that you can say, I know what the rules are going to be, and fixing this. And I'm just going to follow the rules, and if I follow the rules, everything will be okay, and I won't have to have an argument where someone comes in and says, well, I think you should, give $4 million more to the tree fund, or I think you should give $4 million more to East End House, that we don't have to have these arguments again and again and again over where does this little bit of money go, because the only time we ever talk about doing anything in the city is when we have some developer that we can make cough up the money because we don't want to tax people more, because we don't want to carry these things out, because we don't actually care enough about the residents of Cambridge who live here and want to live here and are trying to pay rent here to figure out some better way to do this than to spend 25 freaking hours talking about one development? Really? Really? In the end, I'm relatively happy with how the project has ended up. I think it's going to go to a second reading within the next 2 weeks sometime, probably 2 weeks-ish. And that means that so the project will either pass or fail before the end of this council's term. And, at the moment, it seems like it probably has enough support, enough people working on it to have it pass. Now, this isn't going to be immediate. This is going to be an 8 to 10 year rebuild, because it's a big project, right? It's a big commercial redevelopment project. They're going to have to do a ton of work. This isn't even actually getting permits for the individual buildings. This is just getting permission to have the property zoned such that they can go ask for permits. Nothing's going to happen for years, blah, 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 blah. But I think it seems like at the moment it's going to pass. There's 5 pro-housing councilors who were part of the ABC slate who are on the council currently, as well as Councilor Kelly, all of whom seem to be pretty on board and have gotten most of their desires. Councilor Zondervan and Carlone both voted to not pass it to a second reading, so I can assume that they're not going to be interested in passing it when it comes up for a second reading. Councilor Devereaux voted in favor of it, but I would not be surprised if she also ends up voting against it. I know that she has concerns about some of the aspects of the development. And I think this will probably be the last major thing that the council does this year. I mean, I don't think there's a lot more. It doesn't seem like there's a lot more coming up right now. There's not a lot, of time left. There's 1 or 2, maybe 3 major meetings before people start to go on holidays and vacation and everything else like that. I think the council's basically going to pass the Cambridgeside redevelopment, and that's going to be it. Which brings us into, a new council in January and figuring out where do we go from there? What do we see first? Do we see tenant protections on the table? Do we see, support of statewide regulations on rent control? Do we see campaign finance issues come back and become a major player? What does the beginning of the council look like? And importantly to me, what are we going to do for renters? What does Renters Matter look like in a new council that actually has another new renter on the council? Councilor Carlone rents currently, although he previously owned a home and sold it for $1.3 million or so. Jeevan elected in the most recent election is a renter, is coming in with a different perspective, is a member of the Boston DSA, and is going to have a different perspective on a lot of things, I think, than the existing council. So it'll really interesting to see kind of how the dynamic changes. I expect Patty Nolan coming in will be very similar to the existing Jan Devereaux role. In so far as I think that they have a lot of similarities in the approach that they have taken to kind of conversations in the city so far. I think Jan has a lot of knowledge on specifics in the city that I will be missing as she heads out of office. She and I probably don't see eye to eye on almost any issue, but I do think that her deep knowledge and her deep-seated beliefs, which are driven very much by a very strong and reasonably, coherent, just kind of maybe seems like a rude word to say, but I think that, her views are really pretty easy to understand. Once you know a little bit about her, it's pretty easy to say, okay, now I get it. You will look at it from this lens. And I think that's great. I mean, I think that's, a thing that's great to have in a representative, is to understand how they're looking at the picture, how they're looking at the world. So that's the Cambridgeside Galleria upzoning redevelopment. Like I said, my guess is that will pass. We will see housing built, sometime in the next 5 to 10 years, which is great. And I think that redeveloping the First Street corridor to make it a more lively corridor is really the key benefit there, which has the possibility of bringing more development to First Street, and possibly bringing more housing to First Street, which is this kind of commercial corridor now that has the possibility of bringing a lot more, either under something like the affordable housing overlay or just in general, as people seem like work to bring that forward, especially at the Green Line and Leechmere Station redevelopment. So one of the other things that has been on my mind this week has been, how job security plays into the mind of a renter, in different ways than someone who owns. And it's really not so much job security as it is income security, and income security relative to the price of housing. So one of the things that I think is different about renters is the volatility of the price of housing, right? Like, and this is a key. This is not like some magical revelation that I have realized that renters have more volatility in their price of housing, but rather that, like, this is the thing about renting, is pretty much that that you don't know what your rent is going to be after your next lease renewal. You don't know if you'll get your next lease renewal. You don't know what you don't know. And so, this is one of the things that I look at, and for me, for a long time, I looked at every year as I worked for a startup where I was making, I'm in tech, and I was making, less than the median income, and we were a one family household and a family of four. One income household and a family of four, and trying to take care of that, and looking at it and saying, my salary really isn't going up by that much. In the 3 years that I was there, like, yeah, it went up by, 2% every year, but as I look at the rental prices around me, the rents were going up by 5% every year or 7% every year. And the same is very much true now. I'm lucky that I'm in a position where I actually do pay less than 30% of my income on housing. But every year it gets closer to that 30%. It's really like it creeps up because I took a job and I got a pretty significant paid bump when I switched jobs. But since then I get kind of 2%-ish raises, while my rent has gone up by, in some cases a lot more than that. In one year I went from paying $2,300 a month to paying $3,100 a month because I switched apartments. Like, I had lived in a place for a long time where the rent hadn't gone up, and suddenly I had to make a big swap where, okay, great, I was in good shape, I'd taken this new job, everything was going pretty well, and I found out, like, oh, my husband and I are getting a divorce, we're going to have to sell the house, so, like, you're going to have to leave, and we're not going to keep renting to you. This is now, it's like, okay, great, I got to find a new place to live, and the median income area, or the median price is just so much higher, and my salary didn't go up to match that, right? Like, I didn't suddenly start making more money because I paid more rent. And this is actually something that's interesting in the perspective of the Galleria project, is that there's actually a goal to have these median income or middle income units, which I said before, the maximum prices they can charge for someone who makes up to 110%, 120% of median income is very similar to market rate. But the key thing about these fixed price or these income restricted units is actually that your payment in rent is based on how much money you make. There's a cap. They can't charge more than 30%, including utilities and everything else, of what you make. And that's actually a really important thing to help people kind of, as the prices of housing maybe continue to go up, but your income isn't going up at the same rate as the median or as the rate of housing or other things like that. So when you see some supporters out there talking about, or like Bernie Sanders supporters talking about decommodified housing, and I don't really know what that's supposed to mean to most people, but I know that to me, what it means is kind of detaching the price of housing from the housing market. That you no longer charge rents that the market will bear, and instead tying it to the incomes of the people who live in them. And this is what inclusionary zoning and other income restricted units do, is they separate out the cost of housing from the limitations that are tied to your income. So if your income goes up and it's still within the limits and you don't have to leave or whatever else like that, then that's fine. And your rent can go up. But if your income stays flat and the overall AMI goes up and everything else like that, your rent will still stay flat. And I think that that's a really important thing that obviously almost nobody has. Like, yes, 15% of Cambridge's units are, affordable housing, but almost all of those, or a large number of those, are for people who, have very little income or have, housing voucher, like a whole bunch of different reasons that this happens, but it's only 15% regardless, right? Only 15% of Cambridge's homes are kind of outside the market in this way. And so that means all the rest of us, 85% of the people who are 85% of homes living in Cambridge, is dealing with the fact that their housing costs of renters are going up faster than their income. Now, if you're a homeowner, for the most part, that isn't the case. Or if they are, it's at least going up from a much smaller, the part that's going up is like taxes, which is a much smaller base, right? Like when you buy into a mortgage, you pay the same amount every month on your mortgage modulo the taxes, which go, up or down or whatever in any given year. And that means that, when you have that mortgage, it's not going to go up, and you can plan around that. So if your income isn't going up a lot, that's okay, because your income only has to go up to support, tax increases or maintenance increases or whatever else, not to support that overall your housing costs are going up by 5%. And in a situation where you're looking at where you are and saying, it really means that for me, in order to stay where I am financially, to stay ahead of the curve, to keep myself in a place where I'm paying less than 30% of my income on housing, it does mean that I have to be excellent. I have to be superb. I have to be getting significant raises every year just to keep up with the price of housing. And I can't actually do that. And this is top of mind for me because, unfortunately, 4 of my coworkers were just laid off by my employer earlier this week for, what they claimed were violation of company policies, and I see as them organizing. So they were laid off, and I'm looking at that and saying, like, oh my God, like, how terrifying would that be? How scary would it be to be right now and looking at this and saying, like, not only do I have to, figure out ways to, like, increase my overall earning potential, which is hard, but I have to get to the point where I have to be prepared for being laid off. Like, I have to be prepared for all this other stuff that I'm really not. And it's hard to be, right? Because I don't actually know, like, I signed a 2-year lease because I wanted more stability, but I can't commit to a 5-10-year lease that would keep me in place for a long time, which means I don't know in 18 months what my rent is going to be, or even if I will be able to continue renting in my current place, or I'm going to have to move. And And I don't have that level of stability, and combining that level of stability with a work environment where maybe you get laid off, you don't have any place to go, you've got to be dealing with this kind of stuff, it's terrifying to me. It's terrifying to me. And I don't know what I would do in that situation. I really don't. And I think that it's true for a lot of renters that they don't. When they talk about the fact that something like 40 to 50% of Americans wouldn't be able to deal with a $400 emergency bill if they had one, that's just called rent, right? Like, that's how much my rent will probably go, like, per year. My rent, next year, my rent, which I signed a 2-year lease, so I already know what my rent is going to be next year. It's going to be $100 higher than this year. And if it were to follow the market, which I don't know if that's what my landlord will do, it'll probably be $250 more the year after that. That's $250 a month more that I'm going to have to pay. It's terrifying. It's terrifying because it means you can't quit a job based on principle because you don't have the stability that you would need. You can't, go ahead and take a stand because you don't know what the next rent check is going to cost. And like I said, that's top of mind for me this week because my coworkers were laid off. But I think it applies to so many people who are in less stable job positions combined with the less stable conditions of being a renter. And it's just an unconsidered burden by those who are housing insecure. Just a couple things to think about. Be thankful. For those of you who are housing secure, have a happy Thanksgiving. I'll be back next week. Same bat time, same bat channel. Have a great night. Happy Thanksgiving.